I'm Meredith Davies, and thank you all for joining. We're really excited to talk about this topic today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and Lauren will get things kicked off.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lauren Totino, and I'm a learning engineer on the residential education team within Open Learning. And as you know, I'm joined today by Meredith, who is the project manager for educational systems and services on the residential team. And you may recognize her as the presenter from our last xTalk, where she talked about Canvas tools for teaching and learning. So today's topic is a bit of a continuation of that, although we will specifically be focusing on options in Canvas for creating and grading assessments and assignments. So just as a quick reminder, the residential team has been a resource for support with Canvas since it was rolled out to MIT in 2020, and we offer a variety of support options. So Meredith has Calendar, for example, for scheduling short blocks of time to talk with her about any challenges or questions specific to Canvas. We also offer learning design consultations with learning engineering and learning sciences experts on the team. And then our team also supports lecture capture and the Lightboard Studio. So we're happy to meet with instructors to talk about teaching and learning. So please reach out to us at our residential email address that's shown here. Or if you contact Canvas support, we do work quite closely with the IS&T Canvas support group, so they can connect you with someone on our team as well. And as you know, with us today in the audience is Aaron Kessler, who is also part of the residential team. And as he mentioned, he's able to answer any questions in the chat. So please put any questions you have there, but we'll also be pausing along the way to see if anything should be raised to the group that we can answer out loud. So before we dive into an overview of the assessment-related Canvas tools that we're going to cover today, I just wanted to provide some broad framing and themes for this session and to talk about what we hope you get out of it. So as we talk about the tools, our aim is to get you to start thinking about assessments and grading in different ways. So how can you do interesting things with Canvas tools to help you be purposeful in your approach to creating assessments and doing grading and giving feedback? And thinking about what you want for you and your students to get out of those kinds of activities. So some things to consider as we go along are both the technological and pedagogical affordances of the tools, which means acknowledging sort of two things. One is how certain features of the tools can make creating and grading assessments more efficient for the teaching team in various contexts. And the second is how to capitalize on these tools' affordances for designing assessment experiences with learners, your students, in mind. We also want to emphasize the role of feedback in grading assessments. And we know that students value getting feedback through Canvas. So we'll talk about the tools that are there to support that. And we'll also touch on how feedback works in both directions. So we'll be discussing how tools support giving instructors valuable information about what's sticking with students or what common mistakes or misconceptions to address so that students can continue on in their learning trajectory in the class. And we also want to reiterate how the act of engaging with an assessment itself can deepen and promote learning if designed with the right strategies and tools. So we'll be talking about how Canvas tools enable assessments to be opportunities for students to deepen their learning through evidence-based strategies like low-stakes retrieval practice, learning from peers, and learning from personalized and actionable feedback. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we talk about the tools today. So what are the tools that we're going to cover today? There are three that are native to Canvas: assignments, quizzes, and graded discussions. And we'll also talk about Gradescope, which is an LTI or a tool that integrates with Canvas. We'll also talk a bit about New Analytics, which is a native Canvas tool, and how that can help with communicating with students about assessments and grades. Additionally, we'll briefly review some other tools that integrate with Canvas and have features that could be used for assessment or assignment purposes. And we'll make it clear which ones directly integrate with the Canvas gradebook and which ones do not. And that being said, this would also be the time where Meredith will share some other helpful tips about the Canvas gradebook. And if there's time, we'll wrap up with talking about some specific use cases and examples, some inspired by known examples of use of these tools around MIT, but we will be talking about and showing examples throughout the xTalk. So this would really just be a place to throw out some additional ones and just really get you thinking about your own teaching contexts. And basically, we just want instructors to be able to walk away with a better understanding of which tools might be best based on their context, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to experiment with. And again, the residential education team is here to consult further with you about tools for your specific situation. So please reach out if anything sounds interesting. So now I'll hand it over to Meredith to kick us off with our first tool.
Thank you, Lauren. We have a lot to cover today. So as Lauren said, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat and Erin can help answer questions that way. You can also mention if you'd like us to reach out to you to cover anything that might be fuzzy along the way, since there's going to be quite a bit of information. So we're going to dive right in talking about assignments. Assignments in Canvas cover the function that you would typically think of as assignments. Students complete some task in the course and earn points in your course for that. But more broadly, they are the way for students to turn things into you. So if you have anything you need to collect from students, you can do that by setting up an assignment. Additionally, you can set up assignments as a way to add a to-do item to the student's to-do list and to the student calendar within Canvas. These can be things like lecture videos that they may need to watch or readings that they need to complete before class that aren't going to be worth points, but is a task that they need to complete by a certain date. So I'm going to jump over to my Canvas demo course site. And this is the outline for the Canvas site. We'll mostly be looking at things in this module. But to start with assignments, I'm going to go to the assignments page that shows me all of the assignments for the course. And what I want to show here is that I have set up my course with assignment groups. I have grouped my assignments by discussions, data visualization projects, quizzes, key sets, and perusal. So using assignment groups is a great way to organize assignments within your course. It helps visually for students and for you as the instructor to categorize what's going on in the course site. And you can also use assignment groups to set up a grading scheme within your course. So you can see here that it's showing you this 30%, 20% of total. That's because I've added weighting to my grading scheme in my course, which I can do by clicking on the assignment settings menu and going to assignment group weights, assignment groups weight. So this is the menu where you can add assignment weights to your assignment groups. Additionally, within an individual assignment group, if I expand the settings for one group, I can decide to drop the lowest score, for instance, from a group or higher scores, but you might want to consider something like that in your overall grading scheme. So I'm going to go back to my course outline, and we're going to take a look at this individual assignment here. So we won't spend a ton of time on setting up the assignment, but we will look at some of the assignment settings that will help you kind of customize your assignment and make it meet your learning goals. So if I click edit, this is going to bring me to the menu where I would edit and create the assignment. Up here we have the rich content text editor, which you can use to add links, images, video, whatever kind of media or context your students need to complete the assignment. And below that is where we get into all of the assignment settings. So this first group here, you can see there's a points assignment group and display grade as. Points is the number of points that the assignment is worth, but if you want it to be an ungraded assignment, you can just make that 0. And then to additionally make it ungraded, from the display grade as drop-down menu, you can choose not graded. You also have options here to control the way that the grade is displayed if you want that. When you set an assignment to be non-graded, it doesn't create a column in the gradebook. So that assignment will show up on students' calendars and to-do lists, but there won't be any record of it in your gradebook. You can choose the assignment group here, which we just looked at assignment groups, so you're familiar with that. And then the next box of options here is around the submission type. So if I look at this drop-down menu, there are a few different options. No submission would be nothing is collected. Online is the mechanism by which students submit something online, any type of file or media recording. on paper would be collecting an assignment in class, and external tool is the way to have students submit something via an LTI. And Lauren is going to talk a bit more about the online submission options.
Yeah, so these online submission options might get you thinking about ways to give assessments that are alternatives to or mixed in with some of the more traditional types of assessments like cumulative exams or problem sets. So basically, can get you thinking about other ways to encourage reflection and synthesis from your students. So to get an idea of what such submissions would look like from the student point of view, I'm just going to walk through a few options for online submissions, particularly the ones that can be graded with SpeedGrader, because we'll be talking about that tool in a little bit. So the first one is file upload, which is what Meredith's example assignment is. And this is best suited for things like papers that would be uploaded as a Word document or a PDF, or presentations such as slides that were made in PowerPoint. Another option is text entry, which is a variation on uploading a file wherein the student submits something that's written, but it's aimed at being shorter in length, and the student completes and submits it all within the Canvas interface without leaving it. Then there's the website URL option, which could definitely be used for something a bit more alternative, like in the example here that is asking students to submit a link to a hypothetical digital portfolio that they're keeping throughout the course. And you can see that students can still add some sort of comment in addition to the URL, just to add additional context or anything they need to communicate to the instructor. And as Meredith mentioned, there's also media recording. So students can either record their video right within the Canvas interface or upload a file of the video that maybe they recorded somewhere else, like on their phone. And the prompt in this example is asking students to record a 1-minute video, but you could also make this higher stakes and have students submit a video where they must synthesize content from across the semester and maybe make it a final exam or project. And that actually is based on a real example we've seen at MIT. And then the last option is student annotation, which is one of the newer submission options. And this is also a place where you could get a bit creative with your assessments and have each student annotate a document that you upload. So students would use Canvas's built-in annotation tools that are similar to what an instructor would use in SpeedGrader to mark up a document. And it would be a good way to have students demonstrate their thinking and reasoning through annotation. And this is a submission option where, since it's a bit more involved, it would probably be good to provide some additional instructions on how students would complete the annotation in Canvas and maybe provide an example or model for what you expect for this.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so that shows us the breadth of online submission type options. If I continue down the page, I can set the number of submission attempts. I can also make an assignment a group assignment. I can't actually make this assignment a group assignment because I've already had students submit, or my test students submit to the assignment. But if I chose to make it a group assignment, I would have the option of either manually assigning groups or letting Canvas automatically assign groups. And then when students are ready to submit, only one student per group needs to submit the assignment, and that will be applied to all of the students in the group. When you as the instructor are grading, you have the option to give all of the students in one group the same grade or to grade those students individually. I have the option here to require a peer review portion of an assignment. And if I tick that, it's again going to ask me if I want to manually assign or let Canvas automatically assign peer reviews. And I have the option to enforce anonymity with peer review. So if a peer review is set to be anonymous, then the student reviewing doesn't see whose work they're reviewing, and the student who completed the work doesn't see who reviewed their work. However, you as the instructor can see all of the comments made by the peer reviewer and who's matched with who. The peer review step also prevents the peer reviewer from seeing any previous comments made by instructors or TAs. When you set up a peer review, you have the option to use a rubric along with that, which is something that we'll touch on in just a second. And then this section here, assign within assignments and all of the graded options within Canvas. You can assign the assignment to everybody, which is pretty typical, but you can also set up assignments with assigned to one section on one date and another section of your course on another date, or assign something to just one individual student, for instance, if they need an extension. So I'm going to hit cancel here since we didn't actually make any changes to this assignment. And now that I'm back on the page for the assignment, if I scroll down a little further, you can see here that I have created a rubric for this assignment. If I didn't already have a rubric built, there would be a button right around here that says rubric with a plus sign on it, and that's what I would click to create the rubric. But as it stands, my rubric's already built. I can edit it by clicking on the pencil tool here, and then I can edit any of the criteria and rating descriptions that match to those criteria. I also set the number of points here. And if I've created rubrics in the past, I can use the Find a Rubric tool to import a rubric from that I've used in a different class or before in Canvas. And Lauren's going to talk a bit more about rubrics.
Yeah, so all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with rubrics and their function. So you know that creating a rubric to go along with an assignment can be a great way to communicate and set expectations for what a model performance on the assignment looks like. But what I want you to get to think about now is how the rubrics feature can really be a tool that helps deliver feedback on the assignment that you set up in Canvas. So depending on how you construct the rubric, meaning how much detail you provide for the criteria, like the options you see here, it can be a way to deliver specific feedback the way that annotating or leaving comments on a submission would. So it's something that students can go back to and read through and learn from, and is a bit more substantive than just reading a letter grader points after they get their grades back. And additionally, Meredith had pointed out the option to make the assignment have a peer review component, and providing a rubric for students to use that can be a good way to scaffold how students go about doing the reviewing. And that can be important because we can't always assume that students know how to do a peer review properly or effectively. So they might require some of that additional modeling or support via a rubric. And we'll talk a bit more about this as we discuss graded discussions, because that peer review option will come up again.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so now that we've got this assignment set up, I'm going to hit cancel so I don't make any changes to my rubric. We just want to make sure that it's published when we're ready for students to see it, which this one already is. The next component of using assignments within Canvas is grading the assignments. Since this is a file submission assignment or an online submission, I can grade it using the SpeedGrader. So if I click on the SpeedGrader link, it's going to open up this assignment in the SpeedGrader tool. And what you'll see here is first the document viewer, where I can see the submission for each student in my class, and SpeedGrader organizes grading by student. So I'll grade one student's assignment and then move on to the next student. So right now we're looking at Caleb's assignment. If I click the arrow, it's going to show me the next student's assignment, who's Shira, who's in the audience today. Great work, Shira. Okay, so up here on the toolbar of the SpeedGrader, I have a few different annotation options. I have the option to locate a comment, so I can point to a specific maybe part in the paper that I want to comment on. I can highlight text, I can add a text box with a comment, I can strike through text, and then this is a freeform tool that's handy if you have like an iPad, for instance. And this is an area selection tool. So if there's maybe like an image that you want to highlight or some large area of text, you can use this to select that in the student submission. So since I set up a rubric with this assignment, I can view my rubric as I'm grading by clicking the View Rubric button. And I'm just going to expand this pane a little bit so we can see better. And as I'm going through and grading the assignment, I can just simply click on the rating that applies to the student's work. So in this case, Shira, as I said, did a great job. So she's going to get the highest rating for this first criteria, and you can see that those points were automatically added to her score. I can adjust this since it's a range, and I can add a comment on this individual rubric item. Further down the page, you can see that it's possible to add a comment that applies to the entire assignment, which can be done via text or a media recording or an audio recording. And I can also attach a file to the assignment. So if I chose instead to maybe download all of the assignments and annotate in some other way and then upload them again, I can attach those files here so students can see all of that with their grades when I release the grades. And now Lauren's going to talk a bit more about feedback in SpeedGrader.
And one thing I wanted to note first, to follow up on the feature of the student by student grading, just keep in mind that it's probably best to have one grader at a time go into SpeedGrader to do this, to possibly prevent any overwriting or conflicting comments. And this works just fine for many classes, but I bring it up because later we'll contrast this with the capabilities of Gradescope, which does allow for multiple graders to be in at a time. So that being said, I did want to say a bit more about just how robust your feedback can be when you have all of these options in SpeedGrader. So between the rubric that Meredith showed, the annotation tools, the area to leave general comments, and the options for audio and video and files, SpeedGrader enables you to leave clear, specific, personalized, and actionable feedback that students can learn from and use to improve their next performance. And one of the reasons that we're showing an example of an uploaded paper is because it makes it really easy to think about how you could have an assignment where students submit intermediate drafts of maybe a higher stakes final paper or project, and they can take the feedback that you leave in SpeedGrader on those intermediate drafts to improve incrementally as they work toward the final product. And the feedback options in SpeedGrader are also here to make your jobs easier as graders too. For example, a lot of the annotation tools are meant to mimic how you might grade a physical copy of an assignment. We've heard anecdotally actually that of some instructors who like to use SpeedGrader on the Canvas app on their iPad so that they can use a stylus and then use the free writing annotation tool to kind of simulate, marking of a paper. And another example is, the audio and video options aren't just a super personalized way to give feedback, which is great. But some instructors might just find that it's easier or quicker to talk through their feedback rather than writing it out, but without also having to do that face-to-face with a student. So just some things to think about when considering the role of feedback in your assignments and your goals for that. And I think we have an example too, just a screenshot of how that feedback would look for a student who's viewing this. So again, we're using a paper submission as our example. So students would be able to see the annotations that the instructor left on the paper itself. You can see the instructor used a variety of the tools here. Also the comments towards the upper right corner for the whole submission. And then if they click that show rubric link all the way in the top right corner, it will unfold the rubric that the instructor used to assign points and also leave some additional comments. So these are all the areas that the student will be able to get feedback from when they receive the assignment back.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. So that covers our discussion of SpeedGrader and assignments in general. I just want to add one more point about rubrics that I forgot to say when we were sort of on the rubrics topic, but it takes time to set up a good rubric, but once you've done it, you can reuse that rubric from semester to semester or within different courses. So it's worth the effort to make the rubric meaningful. And you can kind of fine tune that as you teach the course. So I'm going to close out of this page and we'll just pause here to see if anybody has questions about assignments or SpeedGrader or anything that we've covered so far. Okay, great. Oh, this was the submission detail screen. Sorry, Lauren. I forgot to advance the slides, but you can see here, this is the view for the student when they have expanded the rubric and can see the feedback that the instructor has provided. Okay, so moving on, next we're going to talk about quizzes. Quizzes are the tool within Canvas that is used to administer quizzes, and it can also be used to administer surveys to students. So we will cover a bit about quizzes. I'm going to go back to my course and go to my outline. And I have, again, already set up a quiz. So we're going to take a look at this MIT history quiz. Maybe you'll all learn something fun about MIT. So again, we're just going to jump right into the editor, and we see this rich text editor where we can add context for the quiz. But below that is where all of the quiz settings live. And the first drop-down menu here is for the quiz type. Canvas has a few different options for quiz types, including a practice quiz, a graded quiz, a graded survey, and an ungraded survey. If you create a practice quiz, that does not show up in the gradebook, so it's kind of a low stress way to quiz your students, but the graded quiz, of course, will. And Lauren's going to talk a bit more about the quiz types.
Yeah, so I think it's important to call attention to the options you have here because they allow you to be pretty flexible about the stake level of the quiz you want to give. So what do I mean by that? You can choose practice quiz, which Meredith mentioned, which is not graded, to give your students the opportunity for low stakes retrieval practice, which we know is a beneficial practice for learning, right? So the act of testing themselves allows students to know what they don't know, especially when feedback is built in, but also enhances their ability to retain what they do know and makes those connections stronger. But doing this kind of retrieval practice regularly might be a lot of pressure for students if it was graded highly every single time. So the practice quiz option can keep the stakes lower if that is your goal. And then there's the option of surveys, graded or ungraded. And these can be good options if you want students to reflect on their learning, but if you also want to get some feedback from it. So, thinking of feedback as a two-way street where students get feedback from assessments about what they got wrong and how they can improve, but instructors can also get feedback about their instruction and how to pivot based on, common mistakes or questions that students bring up through something like a survey. So either way, it's a learning opportunity for students and it highlights the power of feedback, but just in a bit of a different way from how students get feedback through things like assignments and SpeedGrader.
Great. So below the quiz type dropdown, you can also choose an assignment group, and then there are some more quiz settings. Shuffling answers will change the order of the answers for a particular question. So if you have a multiple choice question, each student would see the answers in a different order. You can set a time limit and allow multiple attempts. If you tick the box to let students see their quiz responses after they've submitted, they'll be able to see what they chose for each answer on the quiz. And if you let students see the correct answer, they'll also be able to see what the correct answer was for each quiz question. These dates only control the dates when students can see the correct answers. They don't have anything to do with the release date of the quiz largely. There are a few other settings here. We see the assign to box again, just like we saw with the assignments. So if I scroll back up to the top of the page, we've been on the details tab, but right next to that is the questions tab, and that is where I actually add questions to my quiz. So if I click on the questions tab, this is the page to add questions, and I can use the new question button down here to add a new question. I've already added questions to my quiz, but we can look at what it would be like to go through that workflow. So I'm going to click on the edit this question option. And the first thing that I would do when creating a quiz question is choose the type of question that I want. So Canvas has a variety of question types, kind of all of the classics that you would think of, multiple choice, true, false, etc. And most of these are going to be auto-graded. The only ones that are not auto-graded are the essay question, the file upload question, and the text. So in those cases, you would grade the responses to those questions manually. But the auto-graded questions will be graded immediately, and so students get that very timely feedback. And along with that, you have the option to add feedback to each answer choice for a question or general feedback for the question. So scrolling down, again, we have this rich text editor where we can enhance the questions that we're writing. And then below that is where I would add the answers for each question, the answer choices for my question. So first I have added my correct answer and I've chosen to add some feedback for that. And then I have my incorrect answers and I have a bit of feedback for each one of those. So and then you'll see down here, there are general answer comments and wrong answer comments, and this would be correct answer comments. So I can use feedback to target each individual answer, and then I can also give feedback about the choices more broadly. So regardless of the wrong answer chosen, the student would see these wrong answer comments. And again, similarly to the rubric, setting up the feedback in quizzes does take some time, but you can reuse it from semester to semester and really fine tune your feedback so that students can connect the dots from what they're taking in the quiz to what they're learning in the class. And Lauren's going to talk a bit more about feedback.
So providing these answer comments for correct, wrong, or just general comments is a way to help students learn through or from assessment. So adding comments that provide more detail than just saying the answer is right or wrong might be part of your broader strategy for trying to address and correct common mistakes and misconceptions. So maybe you try to address some of those live in class, or maybe it's a pattern you're seeing for the whole class and you create a short video to talk about how to address some of those mistakes, or you can do it through this automatic feedback and just provide some richer context to follow up on the answers. So, and you can really make these feedback comments as detailed as you want because you enter them in a rich text editor, which we see throughout Canvas. So you can really make it more robust than just text. You could embed media or links, which is what we have in the examples here, where it links to additional resources for the student to go and refresh in the material or take some other sort of further action, even if they got it correct. So on the left-hand side, we see a student who got the answer incorrect, and there's a feedback comment about that, and it says, you know, to read more, to refresh on this topic, it provides a link. But then on the right-hand side, for even though the answer is correct, you can still provide some answer comments on that. And then in the box at the bottom of that is an example of the general comments. So regardless of what the student chose, you can provide, you know, the example here is a link to an additional resource. So lots of flexibility, a lot of options, and you can really make the feedback rich here.
Thanks, Lauren. So jumping back to the quiz page, you can see down here at the bottom that we have the option to additionally add a new question group. Question groups live within the quiz that you're designing, and they are a way to create categories of questions. So if you're covering maybe 5 different topics on a quiz, you can have a question group for each of those topics with many questions in each group. And then students, you can set the quiz up so that each student in the class gets a different question from each group. Question groups can't be reused outside of the individual quiz that they're built in, but you can set up something else that's called a question bank. That's done on the quizzes page. So we're looking at an individual quiz, but if I were to click on the quiz page, you can set up a question bank there, and those can be shared across multiple courses within Canvas. So I'm just going to click cancel again here. And once you've set up your quiz, much like everything else in Canvas, it needs to be published before it's visible to students. You also have the option here to preview the quiz, which is handy. It's going to show you a view of the quiz that's much like what the students would see. When you submit your answers, you'll see the feedback that you get. So it's just a great way to double check your work. And with that, I think that we are done with quizzes. So do we have any questions about this topic? Okay, great. Then we will move on to graded discussions. Graded discussions are the function in Canvas that allows students to be graded on their participation on a discussion board built in Canvas. So just to get ahead of this, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, the native discussion tool within Canvas can be graded really easily within Canvas. However, Piazza and Slack, which are 2 other kind of popular discussion tools that can be used with Canvas, don't have a grade sync to the gradebook. So if you want to do something that's a discussion that's graded, your best option really is to use the graded discussions in Canvas. So I'm going to pop back over to my Canvas course, and we will start by looking at a focus discussion. There are 2 types of discussions in Canvas, focused and threaded, and we'll get into those a bit as we look at the discussion settings. So again, I've already set up this discussion, but I'm going to click edit, and we'll look at the options here to enhance our discussion. So you can start by adding, again, like some media or whatever the centerpiece is of the discussion through the rich text editor, whether that's a video or an audio file that students should listen to or watch, or whatever it is that you're facilitating the discussion around. And then below that, the first option here is whether the discussion should be threaded or not. This is a focused discussion, so it's not threaded, which means that the level of nesting for comments on the discussion is at 2 levels. So folks can reply to the original discussion prompt and to one poster, but they can't reply to replies. So that will make a bit more sense when we compare visually what a focused discussion looks like versus a threaded discussion. And then the next option here is to force users to post before they see other replies on the discussion board. And Lauren has a little tip about that.
Yeah, just a quick tip about this. So it kind of seems like a minor detail, but choosing this option can actually be a good strategy to ensure authentic, effortful responses from students, because sometimes it's tempting for them to look at what their peers already posted before them and perhaps be a little too influenced by that. So this option encourages students to really think about their response deeply, put things in their own words first, and just critically think about the prompt before engaging with others' responses on the forum.
Okay, so after that, you have the option to decide whether or not the discussion should be graded. Obviously, this one is, since we're talking about graded discussions, and you can allow liking on your discussion board as well, if that's something that you're interested in. You have the option to make this a group discussion, which would, again, limit the discussion to the groups that you've set up in Canvas, or have Canvas manually assigned groups, but each group would have their own discussion board. And then you have some more of the settings that are similar to what we saw in the assignments, including the option to add a peer review step in discussions. And along with the peer review step, you can add a rubric so that students have some understanding of what they should be doing during the peer review step, which Lauren is going to talk a bit more about.
I just wanted to give some clarification on what peer review looks like for a graded discussion, because you might be wondering, like, how are they evaluating that, since it's a bit different from like a submission for an assignment or something like that. So peer reviewers for a graded discussion can just leave a comment if that's how you want it to be. On the visual here, they can just type a comment in, they can leave a media comment or attach a file, but pretty straightforward. But you can also associate a rubric to the graded discussion, and then the peer reviewers will use that to evaluate their classmates' response. So also wanted to note, similar to assignments with peer review, any comments or rubric comments are only between the reviewer and the reviewee. So none of it shows up on the discussion as a whole, and others in the class can't see it. So the next slide shows the rubric that a peer reviewer would see. And again, like when we talked about peer review with assignments, this can be a great way to scaffold the review process for peer reviewers. And in the context of discussion specifically, it might get them to examine their peers' work in a deeper way, just beyond leaving a comment like "good point" or "I agree." It's really walking them through like the elements of the response that they're reviewing. But it's also pretty low stakes for the student doing the reviewing, because students do not receive a grade for completing a peer review. If you wanted that, though, you could assign extra points for a peer review by just creating a no submission assignment in the gradebook and then adding those points manually. So that is an option you have. That being said, even if it is low stakes, it's still important to communicate expectations for peer grading, which a rubric can help with, and just overall the reason that you're having them do this, which can vary based on your particular context. And just a technical note about where to associate a rubric to a graded discussion. So again, similar to assignments, we were showing the edit page with all the details of setting up a discussion. But if you just click on the discussion, there should be a plus rubric button in the top right corner. And you would set it up that way, and then you'd see it show up at the bottom of the page. So very similar and functionally similar to what we showed with an assignment rubric.
Great. So now we'll take a look at what a focused discussion looks like visually. So as I was describing, we have the prompt here, and then the student has replied to the prompt, and then there are some replies to that student, but they're all nested only one level in. So it's a little hard to see, but I think you can tell that all of these are at the same level, which is a contrast to threaded discussion, which allows for infinite nesting, which is what we will look at next. So I'm just going to advance to the next discussion in the course. Oh, actually, I think Lauren has some talking points about the focus discussion first.
Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to revisit this example in particular that shows a Panopto video embedded in the prompt. So That's definitely an option you have because Panopto is also integrated with Canvas, so it would be very easy to embed a video when you're using the rich text editor to set up your discussion prompt. And using this example, whether it's a video embedded like this or a link, some other sort of media or a file, a focused discussion can just be a great space for students to talk around some sort of grounding artifact like this. And it can keep the comments directed at the prompt without too many side branches or side conversations. So between keeping the discussion focused and maybe also choosing that option I talked about earlier, where you have students post before seeing others' replies, it's lower stakes in a quiz, but you can keep this kind of more formal in terms of assessment compared to some of those other communication and discussion channels like Slack or Piazza.
Okay, so now we will take a look at what a threaded discussion looks like. And again, this is set up by editing the discussion and ticking that box to allow threaded replies. So in this example, you can see that I have posted the question as the instructor, what is your favorite place to visit in New England during the summer? And the student has replied, and then several students have replied to each other and to the students. And you can see here that the nesting goes in, which makes it very clear who's replying to whom. And Lauren's going to talk a bit about using threaded discussions in your course.
Yeah, just wanted to call out some of the differences between when you might use this threaded instead of focus. So typically threaded is better suited to be a longer standing space for thoughts and ideas and conversation that persist and evolve over your course. And it really facilitates collaboration and co-construction of knowledge. And that might be something that you want to see from students in grade. So basically, students have the freedom to create any number of related topics and comments, as Meredith pointed out. But overall, though, both threaded and focus can just be a way for students to make their learning visible to their peers, to the instructor, whereas a quiz or an assignment is more of a one-way channel between student and instructor.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. So that will wrap up our discussion of discussions. Do we have any questions about that? Okay, then I'm going to move on to Gradescope. Gradescope is an LTI, as Lauren mentioned during the introduction to the talk, that is an alternative grading option to SpeedGrader. And the main difference between the grading workflow in Gradescope versus SpeedGrader is that when you're using Gradescope, you'll be grading question by question. So you would grade, if a student submitted an assignment, the grader would grade all of question 1, then all of question 2, as opposed to grading one student's entire assignment and then the next student's entire assignment. Much like the Canvas SpeedGrader, or much like the Canvas assignment options, there are a few options for assignments within Gradescope, which Lauren is going to cover.
There are currently 5 options for assignment types in Gradescope. First one is exam/quiz, where the instructor would collect and scan and upload a student's work into Gradescope. And then kind of similarly as the next one, homework/problem set, where students have a window of time to upload their work into Gradescope. But a note about both of these options is that the designation of who uploads into Gradescope can be changed. It's just that this is the default. And we've seen use cases around MIT where for the exam or quiz type, it's actually the student who's uploading it themselves, not the instructor. So pretty flexible there. Another option is Bubble Sheet, which is pretty unique. So Gradescope helps you make a template for this, and then instructors can set up auto grading for it as well. There's also a programming assignment as a type, which also involves auto grading, but for coding assignments specifically. And then there's also online assignment, which students complete and submit all within the Gradescope interface. So that's probably most similar to a Canvas quiz. And overall, these submission options are similar to the ones that we saw for Canvas assignments and quizzes, but Gradescope places more of an emphasis on the ability to grade handwritten assignments that either students or the instructor do physically and then upload and grade within the system. So given this, it's pretty common for assigning and collecting problem sets where students work through problems on paper and then the work is uploaded into Gradescope.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. So we're going to take a look at grading with Gradescope, and we're going to focus on the grading workflow and not really the assignment setup. But I will note that using Gradescope from within your Canvas site is quite handy if you're going to use Gradescope, because you can automatically sync your roster with Gradescope and pass grades back to your Canvas site. So I have set up this assignment here, and what we're looking at here is the instructor view for the assignment, which is why it looks a little bit strange if you were imagining you would see an actual assignment. I'm going to open Gradescope in a new tab so I can use the full screen to grade. This is my course site for this demo, and I have one quiz. So once I've set the assignment up and my students have submitted, then I'm ready to grade, which is where we are now. So I'm going to click on quiz 1, and you can see I have 2 questions on this quiz, and the grading is already broken down by question. So we'll start, of course, with question 1, and the assignment here is for the student to draw the Lewis structure for CO2. So you can see again, like that I'm looking at one question, and this is where I'm going to start with the grading. So looking at this student submission, or actually, let me start with the rubric. So one of the features of Gradescope is being able to build the rubric as you go through the grading process. So right now, the only rubric item that I have is correct. But that will change as I see what mistakes the students have made on their quizzes, on their submissions. So I can see from this student's submission that they have forgotten the double bond between carbon and oxygen. So I can add that as a rubric item. I'm going to say forgot double bond, and I'll say that is going to cost the student 2 points. So when I select that, you'll see their total points have dropped down now to 1 point. And then much like the SpeedGrader, I have a few annotation tools up here, so I can leave a text comment or a written comment to explain what went wrong if there's more feedback to give. So now that I've graded question 1 for this student, I'm going to go to the next student. And now I'm looking at question 1 for my second student submission. And what I see here is that the student has forgotten the double bond, but they have also forgotten the electron clouds around the oxygen. So I'm going to select that they've forgot the double bond and add another rubric item that indicates that they forgot the electron clouds. And I'm going to say that that's going to be half a point off. So I'll select that, and you can see that the student now has half a point total. So this is just a quick example of how you'll continue to build the rubric as you go along grading the question. And one thing that's nice about grading question by question is you can sense the trends of what many students are getting wrong. So let's say I've graded 30 students and I'm realizing that everybody is forgetting this double bond. And maybe that's actually more of my fault and they shouldn't lose 2 points. So I'm going to change this score to only 1 point for forgetting the double bond. And that will retroactively apply to all of the students that I've already graded. So if I go back to my last students, whoops, that took me to the wrong student. But if I go back to the student who I had already graded, I would see that they had also gained back points from my change to the rubric. Similarly to Canvas, once you've built a rubric in Gradescope, you can reuse that rubric from course to course. So it's well worth, again, kind of putting in the time to design a good rubric with good feedback. And additionally, you can grade in the reverse so that you're giving students points for doing things correctly instead of taking points away for doing things incorrectly. So they can start with 0 and build their points up. And Lauren has a bit to say about rubrics in Gradescope.
Yeah, so just a note that the way the rubric works in Gradescope can really help the teaching team and graders manage a big influx of assignments while also maintaining sound pedagogical practices. So for example, let's say that your goal is to encourage spaced and interleaved practice through assigning something like a problem set. And that's a good practice because it can result in increased retention and ability for students to discriminate problem types better. So given this, it can be a good approach to rearrange the order of problems and problem sets or exams as opposed to ordering problems by type. So if you're taking an approach like this, the question by question grading workflow that Meredith showed us, and the fact that you can reuse rubrics for the same problem types can actually facilitate the grading of lots of exams or P-sets with mixed questions like this.
So the other feature of Gradescope that's quite helpful is Gradescope statistics, and Lauren also has some notes about that.
Yeah, just quickly wanted to show you a visual of what that feature in Gradescope looks like. So basically statistics, the page you see here allows instructors to gain further insights into what their students have learned. And you can see assignment level, question level, and rubric level statistics all from this interface. By default, it shows the mean score for each question in the assignment at the assignment level. But if you were to click on one of the bars in the graph representing a question, then you would see the data change to reflect that question statistics. So basically, this feature can help you further hone in on problems or questions that students tend to struggle with, and also give you insights maybe on how to improve the way that you write problems. Again, feedback being a two-way street. So for example, you might want to be more strategic about the way that you write certain problems and questions. So it really helps you to take action in that way.
Thanks, Lauren. So that kind of wraps up our demo of Gradescope, and I'll just close the Gradescope tab and see if anybody has any questions about Gradescope. So the next topic that we'll cover is the new analytics tool. This is an update to Canvas's older analytics, which you may have seen when we first rolled out Canvas, that was not very robust, but the new analytics has some better features, including a built-in messaging tool and a reporting tool, which is what we will focus on today. We also covered new analytics in the previous tools xTalk, so if you're looking for more information, we can refer you to that. So I'm just going to click onto the new analytics page for this course, and this is going to show me at a first glance the average grade for each assignment in my course that has been graded. These haven't been graded yet, and the average course grade. I can view this information for all sections, or I can drill down into an individual student. I can compare a student to a section or to the whole course, and I can drill down into individual sections or assignments as well. I can also filter by the type of assignment that I want to look at. If I click into an individual assignment, this is going to show me the distribution of scores within that assignment, and it's highlighting this Message Students Who tool. So if I click on this envelope, this is going to bring up a menu where I can decide a score range that I may want to reach students who fall within that score range. So let's say I'm concerned about any students who received under a 70% on this. You can see that this BCC list has been populated with one student who falls into that range, and then I can send that student a message for a timely intervention rather than waiting for the student to come to me or seeing if they, continue to struggle in the class. I can do the same thing for students who are missing or who are missing this assignment or who have turned it in late. One other feature that we just want to highlight in the new analytics is the reporting tool. So if I click on the reports, this is going to show me some really quick report options that I can use to see overall the missing assignments in the course, late assignments, excused assignments, etc. And this also ties into the new analytics, kind of ties into the gradebook. So I'm going to click over into the gradebook view now. So I just want to point out that that messaging tool that we saw, where you can message students who fall within a particular score range, you can also access that via the gradebook. And the point the main point that I wanted to highlight about the gradebook is that by default, once an assignment is graded, that grade is going to show up in the gradebook. So if you have an assignment that's going to take you maybe a week to grade and you're going to kind of do it day by day, it's not implausible that some students might get nervous if their friend has a grade, but they don't, whatever. So you can use the grade posting policy options here to decide to post grades manually rather than automatically, which just means that you decide when those grades are released and visible to students. From the student view, if you've selected to post grades manually, they will see that eyeball icon with a line through it, which you may have seen in Canvas, and a note that the instructor hasn't released grades for this assignment yet. And then we also wanted to talk about, so that's a quick recap of new analytics. We also wanted to talk about assessment capabilities with LTIs. So there are a few LTIs that integrate with Canvas, and some of them can share grades seamlessly with your Canvas gradebook. Those include Flipgrid, which is a video discussion board. It functions much like a discussion board, except all of the posts and replies are done via video, and Perusal, which is a collaborative annotation tool. So those can be graded and synced right back to the gradebook. There are a few Canvas LTIs that don't have the capability to sync with the gradebook, but can still be used for assessment. And those include Panopto, Poll Everywhere, and Google Forms. Panopto, you can embed quizzes into videos, and Poll Everywhere is a polling tool. Google Forms is an alternative to Canvas quizzes and or surveys, or Google Forms and Qualtrics are alternatives to Canvas quizzes and surveys. So you can use those for assessments, and if you want to give students a grade for their effort in those tools, you can just manually create a column within the gradebook and assign grades that way. So I think with that, Lauren has some more use cases and examples to share.
Yeah, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to run through these, but basically the slide has some use cases and examples for how to set up assignments, quizzes, and graded discussions for different types of assessment. So actually a lot of these I did touch on throughout the xTalk, but here they are written out again if you want to spend some more time with it. And we will be sending out the slides for today, so you can take your time going through this. And that being said, we also have links to more resources on this slide and also a little earlier in the presentation. So there's plenty more to explore. And as we've said many times, please reach out to the residential education team to talk to us further about any of the tools from today or just anything in general with Canvas, and we'd be happy to help. Thank you all for coming. We're happy to have you.